The first time that Harry meets Ron and Hermione in the Sorcerer's Stone movie is displayed in just a few short minutes. However, J.K. Rowling devotes a whole chapter to these interactions that introduce key characters and themes, which will carry on throughout the entire series. Things like Hermione's strict and uptight rule following, Ron's fear of spiders, and Harry's readiness to defend his family and friends in a heartbeat are all on display during this chapter of the book. For those of you who haven't read the books or have forgotten this moment, this scene in the movie is drastically different from its corresponding chapter in the book. The creators of the film not only removed key moments and characters, but added things that are completely contradictory to one of our key characters' personality. For example, Hermione commits a wizarding crime the first time she meets Harry in the movie, whereas in the book, she is firmly the uptight, strict, rule-following know-it-all that Harry and Ron come to love throughout the series. Plus, Ron and Harry nearly throw hands with Draco and his goons while they're on the train, but thankfully, Scabbers saves the day. My name is Gibby, and welcome back to episode 5 of Movies vs. Manuscripts, Harry Potter edition. This is the series where I analyze the Harry Potter movies scene by scene and compare them to J.K. Rowling's original books. Today, we're covering the changes I mentioned and much more as Harry finds platform 9 3/4 and meets his future best friends on the Hogwarts Express. We'll discuss the conversations that the Weasley family has about Harry that he overhears while on the train, Hermione's real entry into the story, not the made-up version you get in the movie, and Draco's visit to Harry and Ron's compartment before they get to Hogwarts. As always, I'll cover these changes across 4 categories of characters, timeline, location, and plot. Per usual, before we get into the changes, we need to refresh our memory on how the movie portrays these events. So let's recap what happens during this scene in the movie. We start with Hagrid dropping Harry off at King's Cross Station and handing him his ticket. Harry is confused because the ticket says platform 9 3/4, but Hagrid disappears before Harry can ask him about it. Harry heads to platforms 9 and 10 and asks for help, but eventually overhears a family walking by talking about muggles. Recognizing this unique wizarding word, Harry makes his way over to them and witnesses one of the children walk directly into a brick pillar and disappear. Harry then asks the mother of this family how to get onto the platform, and she helps him get through, saying that it's her son's first time as well. After getting onto the platform, Harry boards the train, and the boy he met outside asks if he can join his compartment. He introduces himself as Ron, and then is shocked to find out that he is meeting Harry Potter. Harry ends up ordering a whole boatload of candies and snacks from the trolley, and the two boys share them. Harry tries a candy called a chocolate frog, which jumps away, but the collecting card on the inside is Albus Dumbledore, and Harry is fascinated that the man in the picture left the frame. Ron then asks Harry if he wants to see him try to turn his rat yellow, and Harry excitedly says yes. But before Ron can perform the magic, a girl comes to their compartment door. She says that a boy named Newell has lost his toad and asks if they've seen it. Then she notices Ron's wand out and prods him to do the magic. The spell doesn't work, obviously, and she says that she's practiced some magic too and performs a spell on Harry that repairs his glasses. Ron and Harry are amazed, but annoyed as the girl has insulted Ron's performance, and then tells them they better get on their school robes as she thinks they'll be at Hogwarts soon. She starts to leave and then turns back to tell Ron that he has something on his nose, and then she departs. And this is where the scene ends and our analysis begins. Let's start by going over all the character changes, and this week there are quite a few. The movie shows us our standard cast, which includes Hagrid, Harry, Hermione, and the Weasleys, plus we get to see Dumbledore in his photo, and Neville is mentioned by name. As for characters we miss in this scene, we don't see Draco Malfoy, Crabbe and Goyle, and Lee Jordan. Additionally, Neville is actually in the flesh in this chapter, which we'll get more into in the plot changes. There are also a few extra witches and wizards named while Harry is going through multiple chocolate frog collecting cards, but I won't go through all of their names. And lastly, Nicholas Flamel is mentioned, which we know plays a larger role in the story. In the movie, we don't hear Flamel until much later, but in the book, he is noted on Dumbledore's chocolate frog card. Pretty much what we hear Hermione read from a book later in the movie is what is said on the card about Nicholas Flamel. The card simply mentions that one of Dumbledore's most notable achievements is his work with Flamel on the Philosopher's Stone and the Elixir of Life. Now onto the location and timeline changes. They kind of go hand in hand, so I'll address them together. In the book, as I mentioned last week, Hagrid doesn't drop Harry off at King's Cross. Harry's birthday is July 31st, and the Hogwarts Express doesn't depart until September 1st. So as for timeline, we're missing the whole month of August in the movie. And as for location, Harry stays with the Dursleys, who are now very upset at and scared of Harry. This segues perfectly into our first plot change, so let's go ahead and get those going. Real quick, I just want to remind you that if you want to follow along each week with me as I do this series, you can go down in the video description and use my link to claim your free audiobook on Audible. You can enjoy these books along with me and support the channel panel at the same time. Alright, onto the changes. First up, as I just mentioned, Hagrid doesn't accompany Harry to King's Cross. He simply gives Harry his ticket in July and then tells him to be at the platform on September 1st, which then plays into the next change of Harry being with the Dursleys for the month of August. The chapter opens by describing his uneventful time that he spends mostly reading his textbooks for school. The Dursleys essentially ignore him all of August, which he says is great, but also really depressing because he feels like he doesn't exist. Fun fact, Hedwig actually gets her name from Harry's History of Magic textbook, which is a detail left out of the movie. Next, the movie omits the moment Harry asks his uncle to give him a lift to King's Cross on September 1st. Vernon makes a snide remark that it is strange that a wizarding school uses a train and not a magical item of some sort to transport students. He asks Harry where he's supposed to go, and Harry reads his ticket and tells him that the train is at platform 9 3/4. Vernon says that that is rubbish and then almost gets excited about this chance to humiliate Harry. He tells him that he'll be taking him to King's Cross, and we can tell that Vernon is loving the thought of Harry walking around the station looking for a platform that doesn't exist. A little bit of an aside, he says that he is heading to London anyway, or else he wouldn't have taken Harry, and Harry asks why he's going to London. Vernon replies that he is taking Dudley to the doctor to get the pig's tail removed. I think it's funny to think that even a month later, Dudley still has a pig's tail from Hagrid's spell. Next, we come to the moment that Harry is dropped off at the train station. Mr. Dursley wheels Harry's cart and luggage in for him, which Harry notes as oddly helpful. Then, once they reach platforms 9 and 10, Vernon says have a good term and then leaves. Harry then watches as the laughing Dursley trio drives away. The next change is in regards to Harry's interaction with the Weasleys. Although the movie pretty much copy-pastes from the book the moment that Harry asks Mrs. Weasley how to get onto the platform, it's the next section that the movie omits. When Harry is trying to get his luggage into the train, Fred and George help him get his trunk into the compartment. They see his scar and realize that he is Harry Potter. Harry then sits down in the compartment and sees the Weasleys just outside the window. Mrs. Weasley tries to wipe something off of Ron's nose, but he resists. Percy comes out and says that he has to go to the prefect area, and Fred and George make fun of him per usual. Then he hears Fred and George tell Mrs. Weasley and the rest of them that they met Harry Potter, and Ginny asks if she can go on the train and see him again. Mrs. Weasley then defends Harry, saying that he isn't something that you goggle at the zoo. The twins mention that he really does have a lightning scar, and then wonder if Harry remembers what Voldemort looks like. Mrs. Weasley then becomes very stern and says that she forbids them to ask Harry anything about that night. Next, Ron boards the train and comes to Harry's compartment asking if he can join. Fred and George then stop by and mention to Ron that Lee Jordan has a spider they're going to see, and Ron becomes squeamish and doesn't join them. As you can tell, this is already preparing us for Ron's fear of spiders. Before the twins leave, they introduce themselves to Harry, which then sparks conversation between Ron and Harry, as Ron says that he thought Fred and George were joking about Harry Potter being on the train. This is a slight change from the movie, as in this scene, it seems like Ron is completely shocked at Harry Potter being there, but in the book, he would have already learned that the boy they helped get onto the platform was Harry. Next, the movie removes a massive amount of dialogue between Ron and Harry. They almost instantly become friends. The boys bond over their mutual interest in each other. Harry is interested in learning about Ron's all-wizard family, and Ron is fascinated by Harry being raised by Muggles and his origin story. We also learn Ron has 5 brothers, and he mentions that he's under a lot of pressure, as all of his older brothers have accomplished something, like prefect, head boy, or captain of the Quidditch team. He mentions that he gets nothing new, including his pet rat, which he pulls out and shows Harry. After Ron shares too much about how his family is poor, he goes red and stops talking. But Harry comforts him by telling him all about how he hadn't ever had money and got everything only after Dudley was done with it. Another small change is that the chocolate frog never jumps away from Harry in the book. In fact, it really doesn't mention the frog moving at all. But we do get that extra tidbit from Dumbledore on the collector's card. In the movie, it's a brief moment, but in the book, like I mentioned earlier, we learn what is written on the card, and lo and behold, the card mentions one of Dumbledore's notable achievements, being his work with Nicholas Flamel. After Harry and Ron have spent some time bonding over candy and snacks, a boy opens up the compartment door and asks them if they've seen a toad. He is nearly crying, and we learn that this is Neville. Of course, in the movie, we don't see Neville, but just hear about him from Hermione, and we'll get to that moment in just a minute. After Neville leaves, Ron mentions that if he had a toad, he would try to lose it as soon as possible, but then quickly follows up this comment by saying he doesn't have much room to talk as he brought Scabbers, who is pretty pathetic. This prompts him to try and turn Scabbers yellow, but before he can, Neville returns with a girl. This, of course, is Hermione, as she is trying to help Neville find his toad. We very quickly learn that she is a fast talker, as she goes on and on about magic and school and books. You pretty much know exactly what this character is all about within 10 seconds of her showing up on the page. Hermione actually introduces herself in this moment, and when Harry introduces himself to her, she says that she knows knows all about him because he's in multiple extra books that she's picked up for background reading on the history of the wizarding world. Harry, who is still getting used to his fame, is surprised to learn that he's in history books. Hermione asks if they know what house they'll be in and says that she'd like to be in Gryffindor, but would be fine with Ravenclaw as well. Then after she leaves, Ron says, whatever house she's in, I hope I'm not in it. And now we come to a crazy change that they made for the movie, one that still doesn't seem to have an explanation amongst fans. This is actually an addition that the filmmakers made to the moment when Hermione meets Harry. In the book, it's a relatively normal moment, as I previously described, but in the movie, after Hermione witnesses Ron's failed spell, she goes up to Harry and repairs his glasses. What's so crazy about this? Well, if you recall from pretty much every other Harry Potter movie, they put a massive emphasis on the reasonable restriction of underage sorcery. This law states that young witches and wizards are not allowed to use magic outside of school. Hermione, being the massive rule follower that she is, should have known better than to perform magic for fear of getting expelled. Even later in the series, she reprimands Harry for blowing up Vernon's sister Marge, which she says could have gotten him expelled. It's this brief moment in the movie that helps us as the viewer understand Hermione's character a bit more. She's an overachiever and can already perform magic at a young age, but technically, this would have been illegal. Anyway, let's move on to our last couple of changes, which gets us into Ron and Harry's confrontation with Draco, Crabbe, and Goyle. Before this moment with Draco, however, Harry asks Ron what his brothers do, as he is curious what jobs wizards get after school. Ron mentions one of his brothers works for Gringotts, and then says that one of the high security vaults was broken into. In the movie, we don't learn about this break-in until much later. Now finally, let's discuss a crucial exchange between Ron, Harry, and Draco that the filmmakers once again decided to cut, saving Draco's entry into the movies for the steps of Hogwarts. In the book, Draco, Crabbe, and Goyle visit Harry's compartment before they get to Hogwarts. Ron and Harry are discussing Quidditch, as Ron is shocked that Harry doesn't know about the sport and is desperate to fill Harry in on his favorite teams and what the sport's all about. At this moment, the compartment door opens up and Draco is standing there with his goons. Draco's interaction with Harry here is almost copy and pasted to what the movie shows once they get to Hogwarts. Just like in the movie, Harry declines Draco's hand in friendship, but it happens here in the train. The only difference is that after Harry declines Draco, Draco insults Harry's parents, the Weasleys, and Hagrid. Ron and Harry stand up to fight, and as Goyle reaches to take some of their food, Scabbers comes to the rescue and bites him, causing all three boys to run off. Then Hermione walks up asking what all the commotion was, and she tells them they better get their robes on as they're almost to Hogwarts. As they're getting dressed, Ron and Harry talk about the Malfoys, and Ron says that his dad has mentioned how they were the first to come back to our side after Voldemort disappeared, claiming that they had been bewitched, but Ron's dad doesn't believe it. This moment is a clear indication of Harry and Ron's bond from the get-go, and Harry's bravery and similarity to his father's school days. Harry is a peacemaker and minds his own business until his parents or friends are brought into the mix. Harry is the kind of boy who has learned to take a physical and emotional beating without saying a word, but as soon as you insult the ones he loves, he's gonna come for your neck. Thankfully, Ron and Harry don't get in trouble at all because of this, as the only fighting that occurs is thanks to Scabbers coming to the rescue. If only Scabbers wasn't a murderous traitor, he could have been such a good pet. Anyway, that wraps up this week's episode, and I want to hear your thoughts on these scenes in the comments below. Do you agree with the filmmakers' portrayal of our main trio, or would you have preferred a more extended version of these events? As always, have a great week, and I'll see you in the next episode.